The rain pounded against Jack Miller's worn canvas jacket as he sprinted toward Harborview Medical's sliding doors. Mia's fragile frame pressed tight against his chest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the neon emergency sign just as a sudden crack of thunder rattled the glass. A surge of adrenaline pushed him forward past jittery patients clutching tissues and trembling on plastic seats. Mia whimpered, her breath shallow, each one a fragile promise of life. Jack's heart thudded in his ears. This wasn't just another night shift for a single father. It was a race against time itself. As he skidded into the lobby, water dripping off his hair, his eyes locked on the admissions desk. He pressed forward, voice hoarse but determined. "Please, my daughter. She needs help now." In that heartbeat, Jack made a choice that would reverberate far beyond these walls. If this story moved you, drop a comment below, sharing a time you witnessed unexpected kindness. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss the rest of this unforgettable journey. Jack sank onto the cold vinyl seat nearest the vending machines, his legs trembling from exertion. Mia's small body, bundled in a thin hoodie, rested against him like driftwood against a cliff. The ER waiting room felt more like a holding pen, for the suffering fluorescent lights overhead buzzed. Tubes of antiseptic odor lingered in every breath, and the murmurs of pain and frustration built into a constant low-grade roar. Jack brushed damp strands of hair from Mia's forehead. Her cheeks flushed a dangerous crimson. He glanced toward the digital board Miller. Jack, room 4. Relief flickered in his chest, but there was no time to savor it. Mia's eyelids fluttered, and she coughed a harsh rasp that made Jack's stomach tighten. He had known her asthma could spike overnight when the air turned muggy, but he hadn't expected the daycare's old building to trigger such a fierce attack. By the time he'd finished demolition cleanup at the construction site and driven through the downpour, every clinic in the city had closed. Just as Jack reached for his phone to text their landlord about a new inhaler refill, the doors whooshed open. A bone-chilling gust swept through the lobby, scattering discarded magazines. All heads turned. A woman staggered in her coat, soaked through hair plastered to her face. In her arms, she clutched a blood-stained scarf. One shaky step, then another, until her knees buckled, and she crashed onto the linoleum with a thud that silenced the room. Gasps rippled out, but no one rushed to help. A security guard advanced only to freeze when the woman coughed again. Crimson droplets spattering the pristine floor. Someone muttered drunk under their breath. Another shook their head and wrinkled their nose. Jack's jaw hardened. He glanced at Mia, whose eyelashes fluttered in her sleep. Even in her weakened state, she stirred at the commotion, peering up at the stranger with wide, worried eyes. "Daddy," Mia whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Jack's heart clenched. He swallowed past the lump in his throat and rose to his feet, determination igniting like a flare in his chest. Approaching the desk, he caught the nurse's eye. She was on the phone, her expression impatient. "Sir," she said when she noticed him, "room 4 is ready." Jack opened his mouth, then hesitated. The woman on the floor needed that slot more than Mia did, and more than he did. He squared his shoulders. "Give her my spot," he said, voice firm enough to cut through the nurse's stubborn frown. Her pen hovered over the screen. "Sir, your daughter?" "I want her treated." Jack interrupted gently, but not ahead of someone who's bleeding out. The nurse stared at him, eyes narrowing. Then, with a resigned nod, she tapped a few keys. "Gurney," for the woman, she called out. 2 orderlies hurried forward, lifted the stranger, and wheeled her through the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Jack settled back into the chair, his arms aching from cradling Mia. She stirred, small fingers curling around his shirt. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she murmured, voice husky with exhaustion. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You make me braver than I am," he whispered. An older man in a mechanic's jacket snorted from across the room. "That was noble but reckless. You might have cost your kid her treatment." Jack didn't respond. He had nothing to explain to a stranger, but deep in his mind he could still hear his wife's voice, weak and panicked, begging for help in a weekend clinic that refused her entry. He remembered pounding on that locked door, the neon sign mocking them. By the time they found a real ER, it was too late. Emma's final breath had slipped away before they could save her. That memory lived inside Jack like a pulse of guilt, a constant reminder that sometimes kindness alone wasn't enough. Minutes trickled by. Mia's breathing grew steadier. her eyelashes resting softly against her cheeks. Jack watched the fluorescent bulb above him flicker, and he realized he didn't regret what he'd done. His daughter's safety mattered most, but this stranger, this woman bleeding in the hallway, needed him too. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. Dr. Carter, a tall man in navy scrubs, appeared at the desk. His brow was drawn tight. "Who brought her in?" he demanded. "The man in the hoodie," the nurse replied. "He insisted." Dr. Carter tapped a tablet, eyes scanning the chart that popped up. His face paled. "Julia Bennett," he whispered. Jack frowned. He had no idea who Julia Bennett was. Before he could ask, Dr. Carter vanished down the hallway, urgency in every stride. He returned moments later, voice low but intense. "Mr. Miller, I need you to come with me." Jack lifted Mia, gently settling her back against his shoulder. His muscles trembled from fatigue, but he followed. In the hush of room 12, Julia Bennett lay on a crisp white sheet I4, in her arm face drained of color. Her gray-blue eyes locked on Jack. "You stayed," she said, voice soft but steady. "You didn't ask who I was." Jack shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. She studied him as if trying to read every line in his face. Then she tilted her head. Most people wouldn't. The weight of her words settled between them. Jack realized this was more than gratitude. It was a discovery that in a world of assumptions and self-interest, true compassion still existed. He offered a small smile. "My daughter needed someone to help her too." Julia nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Jack Miller." He met her gaze, searching for something beyond the title. In that quiet moment, he understood that sometimes a single act of kindness could chart a new course for two very different lives, one of a struggling single dad and one of the woman at the heart of a medical empire. And whatever came next, neither of them would ever be the same. Jack shifted on the stiff vinyl seat, the antiseptic smell prickling at the back of his throat like an uninvited memory. He pulled Mia closer, her tiny body trembling against him, not just from the cold that seeped through her damp sweater, but from the wheezing that rattled each breath. He pressed the heel of his hand against her back, hoping the gentle pressure might ease the constriction in her chest, but it only seemed to make her cough harder. Each hacking gasp echoed through the waiting room, a chorus of coughs, groans, and restless sighs. Time felt liquid and unforgiving, trickling away one labored breath at a time. Outside, the rain had softened into a fine mist, its patter against the windows, a lullaby, cruel in its irony. A woman flagged down a passing security guard, complaining that the heat in the hallway was too low. Another patient tapped impatiently on his phone, scrolling through news alerts as though headlines could speed up a doctor's steps. Jack watched them, but didn't see them. His world had narrowed to the rhythm of Mia's breathing and the downward sweep of the digital board's call numbers. Room 4 still hung there empty, awaiting their turn. He glanced at his watch, 12:07 a.m. "Daddy?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes fluttered open, damp and luminous. Jack's chest tightened at the sight of her small face, flushed and pale in equal measure. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly. She managed a nod, her hand brushing against his shirt. "It's like a weight on my chest." He swallowed. "I know, sweetheart. Just keep breathing for me, okay?" In and out, nice and slow. He demonstrated a steady inhale, counting in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the exhale. 1, 2, 3. Mia matched him as best she could, her breaths jagged but deliberate. A janitor rolled a trash bin past them, the wheels squeaking on the linoleum. Jack seized on the motion, tracking the man's silhouette as he disappeared down the hall. He wondered how many times people had ignored the plight of someone gasping for air. Too many. His mind drifted back to Emma, his wife lying in a cold ER bed 3 years ago. Fingertips splayed against the crisp white sheet as she begged for help that never came. He remembered pounding on doors marked "no entry," urging clinic staff to admit her only to be told she wasn't serious enough. By the time she collapsed, it was too late. That helplessness had hollowed him out, teaching him that mercy sometimes arrived too late. Tonight he vowed would be different. He felt a gentle tug at his jacket sleeve. Mia looked up, eyes glassy. "Are we going to be okay?" Jack inhaled, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "We will be. The nurse said we'll get in soon." He glanced at the board again. Room 4. Then just as quickly, the number blinked to room 5. He exhaled hard, the tension in his shoulders easing only slightly. See? It's moving. A shiver ran through Mia. Jack slipped off his jacket, draping it over her small shoulders. It was drenched, and the fabric clung cold and heavy against her skin, but he hoped the extra layer would help. He patted her back again slower this time, as though trying to rock her in mid-air. The other patients glanced their way, curiosity in their eyes, but no one offered a blanket or a kind word. From the corner of his eye, Jack noticed the security guard who'd hesitated over Olivia Bennett's collapse, talking quietly into his radio. The guard's posture was stiff, professional. The nurse beside him scribbled notes on a clipboard. Jack wondered if they knew who she was, if they realized that vast funds for the very hospital they occupied hung on the fate of that bleeding woman. He felt a surge of protectiveness, not only for Mia, but for the stranger he'd sacrificed his spot for. Kindness, he reminded himself, wasn't about notoriety. It was about action. Mia coughed again, low and urgent. Jack slipped his hand into his pocket and produced the small inhaler canister he'd managed to keep in his coat. Here, he said, pressing it into her palm. Try this one more time. She shook her head. It's empty, she rasped. He closed his eyes, frustration flaring. He should have stocked up. He always should have. But overtime at the demolition site was scarce, and inhalers were expensive without decent insurance. He'd done everything he could to stretch what they had, but tonight's storm had been brutal. He swallowed the apology that threatened to rise in his voice and simply held her tighter. The nurse called another room number. Jack straightened, hope blossoming. He rose, but Mia leaned into him, too weak to stand. He knelt down and cradled her in his arms. Okay, baby, let's go. He lifted her to her feet. The weight of her in his arms was both anchor and motivation. As he guided her toward the nurse's desk, a man in a crisp hospital coat intercepted them. Jack recognized the badge, Dr. Carter. Panic skittered through him. Was there a problem? He swallowed. Dr. Carter's face was grim. I need to speak with you for a moment, Mr. Miller. He motioned to a small alcove behind the reception. Jack set Mia down gently, hovering protectively as she gripped his pant leg. In the semi-private space, Dr. Carter closed the sliding partition behind him. It's about the woman you helped, he said quietly. Her name is Olivia Bennett. She's integral to this institution. He hesitated. You may have saved more than a life tonight. Jack frowned, confusion mixing with dread. I'm sorry. Dr. Carter glanced back at the desk, then lowered his voice. Ms. Bennett is the primary benefactor of the Greenstone Foundation. They've underwritten this entire ER renovation millions of dollars. She prefers anonymity. She didn't want anyone to know who she was. Jack's stomach clenched. He stared at the linoleum, the antiseptic scent suddenly suffocating. I had no idea. The doctor placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. I know, but thank you, truly. He gave a curt nod and slipped away, disappearing toward the back corridors. Jack exhaled tension flooding out in a rush. He stared at Mia, her eyes wide with curiosity and renewed strength. Everything okay? He asked. She nodded, blinking as though waking from a dream. Daddy, she's someone important. He managed a small laugh, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. Yeah, pretty important. He pressed his lips to her temple. But right now, all that matters is you. Mia smiled, faint but genuine. I like that. They returned to their seat. Jack retrieved his phone battery, teetering at 10%. He thumbed his father's number, hesitating, then tapped out a quick message. She's here. We'll be okay. He hit send before he could second guess. His dad would worry, he always did, but he needed to focus on the moment. Mia's steady breathing, the soft hum of the pharmacy sign across the hall, the subtle warmth spreading through his chest that came from doing the right thing. The clock on the wall clicked to 12:42 a.m. Soon their name would flash again. Jack tucked his phone away and wrapped his arms around Mia, drawing her into his side. Almost there, he whispered. She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closing as exhaustion overcame her. He closed his own eyes, savoring the rare peace that came in the eye of a storm. Outside, the rain diminished to drizzles. Inside, the waiting room settled into a hushed expectancy. Jack promised himself that no matter what happened next, he would hold tight to this moment, the quiet before the next breath, the fragile calm between two lives forever altered by a single act of compassion. Rainwater pooled beneath the lobby mat as the automatic doors groaned open. Jack Miller's shoulders tensed when he saw her, a woman staggering through the sheets of rain, her coat sodden, clinging to a frame too slender to bear its weight. Her boots scuffed the floor, leaving temporary trails of water. Jack's gaze flicked from her trembling figure to Mia pressed against his side and back again. A flash of lightning from outside turned her silhouette into a blur of motion and shadow. Then she coughed a deep rattling sound that stilled the room for a heartbeat. She brought one hand to her mouth, eyes unfocused and glassy. Dark liquid glimmered on her fingertips. Jack's pulse quickened. The waiting room's ambient noise, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant wail of a siren faded as every head turned toward the scene. Some muttered under their breath, "Drunk junkie." A man leaned toward his wife and whispered loud enough for Jack to hear, "Bet she's off her meds." The security guard furrowed his brow, stepping forward, then hesitated. The stranger's legs buckled. She swayed once, twice, and then collapsed in a heap on the linoleum. Her coat pooled around her, water and blood mingling on the floor. Jack's heart lurched. He glanced down at Mia, whose small face was drawn with concern. Her big brown eyes searched his as if asking what was happening. In that moment, Jack felt every second stretch into an eternity like the wait before the tide breaks. He didn't dare move yet. His body hummed with the instinct to rush to her side. Mia's voice trembled. "Daddy, she's hurt." It was barely above a whisper, but it cut through Jack's roaring thoughts. He pressed a finger to her lips. "Stay here," he murmured, heart pounding. He wondered if the nurse at the desk had noticed, but the woman was typing on her tablet, eyes glued to the screen. Another patient tapped his foot, impatiently checking his watch. No one offered a blanket. No one reached out a hand. The world felt brittle and cold, soaked by rain, stiff with fear. Jack rose his chair, scraping against the linoleum tile. He took 3 quick steps toward the fallen woman. With each movement, he felt the memory of Emma, his late wife, flash behind his eyes. Emma's final night had been a blur of frantic pacing and closed doors. She had reached out begging for help, only to be told the clinic was full. Jack had felt the same helplessness, now the weight of knowing he could do something, but that every second counted. He swallowed hard, chest tight, and knelt beside the stranger. Her coat slid open as he leaned forward. He saw her face, pale, tight-lipped eyelashes, damp with rain and pain. He reached out gently, resting a finger on her forehead. It was cold as ice. She coughed again, a wet, desperate sound, and her body convulsed. Jack's stomach twisted. Instinct compelled him to lift her head to clear her airway, to do anything. But he hesitated, caught between fear of disease and the simple human need to help. Mia's small hand brushed his arm. Jack looked down. She was on her tiptoes, her little fingers quivering. "Daddy!" she said, voice cracking. "She needs help." His breath caught. She was right. He could see the woman's chest rock with each unsuccessful attempt to draw air. A nurse's aide hovered nearby, uncertain. Jack's sense of urgency soared. He felt his pulse in his throat, his vision narrowing to a tunnel focused on the woman's fluttering lashes and the blood-spattered floor. He rose again, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Someone call a gurney," he said louder than he intended. Heads turned. The nurse at the desk looked up, surprised. The security guard snapped out of his indecision and nodded toward Jack. Within seconds, 2 orderlies hurried forward, cautious but ready, lifting the woman with surprising gentleness. Jack stepped back, heart still thrumming as they wheeled her away, the wheels squeaking against the floor. The hushed whispers resumed. "Who was that I heard she's a VIP?" Jack's mind was spinning, but he kept his gaze fixed on Mia. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythms. He dropped to one knee beside her, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "You did good," he murmured. She managed a small, shaky smile. "I was scared," she admitted. Jack swallowed, offering a reassuring squeeze of her hand. "Me too, baby. But sometimes doing what's right means stepping into the storm." He lifted Mia into his arms again and guided her back to their seat. The vinyl was cold against his jacket, but he didn't notice. His thoughts were tangled in rain-soaked hair, wet coats, the thrill of guilt and relief. He wondered if the woman would live, if the gurney would reach her in time. He remembered Emma's vacant eyes as they loaded her onto a stretcher and the hollow ache that stayed with him for months. He had sworn he'd never feel that helpless again. Mia leaned against him, whispering, "Will she be okay?" Jack pressed his lips to her temple. "We'll hope for the best." He closed his eyes for a second, gathering what calm he could. When he opened them, the board blinked room 4, still waiting. A fresh wave of determination washed over him. He realized that tonight they were not just recipients of care, but bearers of it. He thought of how small acts a seat given a hand extended could ripple through lives. He caught sight of Dr. Carter stepping out of the restricted doors, talking urgently into his phone. The doctor's face was pale, voice hushed. Jack's stomach tightened. He held Mia tighter, smoothing her hair. She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Her breathing, though still shallow, was steadier than before. Jack leaned back, pressing his shoulder against the cold wall, feeling the simple warmth of her against him. In the quiet that followed, Jack reflected on the harshness of assumptions. The crowd had dismissed the woman as a drunk, a lost cause. But Jack had seen someone fragile and in need. His daughter's gentle whisper had been the catalyst proof that empathy often begins with a child's heart. He thought about the power of kindness, how it cut through the noise of scorn and indifference. He realized that sometimes helping another was the very thing that saved you. As the clock ticked past 12:20 a.m., the waiting room's tension shifted. The earlier restlessness had given way to a watchful calm. People sat, more upright, eyes flicking back to the corridor where the gurney had disappeared. Jack wondered if anyone else felt the change, that subtle spark when a community remembers its humanity. He looked down at Mia, her lashes brushing her cheeks, and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me what matters." He closed his eyes, breathing in the antiseptic air tinged with rain and possibility. In that moment, Jack knew their night in the ER would be more than just another entry in a medical log. It would be the night Jack Miller learned that small gestures could have seismic impact, and that compassion, once ignited, could alter the course of lives in ways no one could predict. Jack's heart lurched when the nurse's voice cut through the din. "Miller, room 3. He rose on instinct, relief and fear colliding in his chest. Relief because Mia had waited so long, fear because every second counted when her tiny lungs felt like they were caving in. He shifted her weight in his arms, marveling at the fragility of her frame, at how a single wheeze could dismantle his world. But then Mia stirred against him, her eyes fluttering open. She gazed up at him, breath coming in shallow pants. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small, fragile. "Please, help her." He froze. His pulse hammered in his ears. He'd practiced this moment for months, racing Mia through the rain, navigating locked clinic doors, pleading for someone to see her. All that preparation had led to this salvation at last. But salvation for Mia wasn't salvation for everyone. Jack glanced toward the hallway where Olivia Bennett's gurney disappeared, the guard's footsteps echoing on linoleum. He remembered the look on her face, the glazed panic, the tremor in her hand as she coughed blood onto the floor. He knelt, a sudden weight pressing on his ribs. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "you're going to be okay." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, feeling the warmth of her fever under his lips. "But she needs help too." The nurse's voice sounded again, crisp and official. "Miller, please proceed." Jack stood, a swirl of emotions roiling inside him. He straightened to his full height, inhaled deep. Around them, the waiting room had fallen into a hush. The mechanic's voice, a heavy-set man in grease-stained overalls, had snorted at Jack's earlier gesture, but now even he watched with wary curiosity. Others leaned forward, some with smartphones poised as if capturing every split second. Jack looked at the nurse. He saw the impatience in her eyes, the spreadsheet of tasks ticking down in her mind. He saw the medicine she carried in her gloved hands, treatments earmarked for Mia. But he also saw the life halting in Olivia's still body, the unfinished story she carried. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood within arm's reach of the desk. His voice, when it came, was firm but kind. "Give her my spot." Silence cracked like ice. The nurse's pen hovered over the touchscreen. A patient shifted behind Jack, clearing their throat. The mechanic muttered, "That's noble." Crazy, but noble. The nurse blinked, her expression flickering between protocol and compassion. Sir, your daughter Jack raised a hand, palm open. She's stable for now. They've given her meds oxygen. She'll be okay for a few more minutes. But that woman, she almost died on the floor. He paused, steadying himself with a breath. She needs help more than we do. The nurse's brow softened. She tapped the screen fingers steady now. Transferring slot to patient Bennett, she said, voice low. Gurney's waiting. Jack let his breath out in a rush. He watched as the guards reappeared, wheeling Olivia's gurney back into view. The woman's face was pale, almost ghostly under the harsh lights, but as they lifted her, her eyelids fluttered. Jack's chest tightened with relief. He swallowed past the lump in his throat. Mia whispered against his jacket. That was brave. He swallowed again, pressing her closer. You're the brave one. He lifted her gently, settling her back against his chest. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, squeezing. A ripple moved through the waiting room. Some faces nodded in respect. Others exchanged incredulous looks as though testing whether this was real or some elaborate stunt. A young mother clutched her toddler tight, her eyes wide. An elderly man adjusted his glasses, leaning forward. The nurse who had called Jack's name glanced up, offering a brief, genuine smile, a rare concession in this world of clipped syllables and rushed charts. Jack felt a flush warm his cheeks, a mix of shame and pride. He had given his spot away. He had risked Mia's comfort and safety. Yet for the first time since Emma had slipped from his arms, he felt aligned with his own heart. It wasn't recklessness. It was mercy without expectation. He found a seat and sat down carefully, each movement measured so as not to jostle Mia. She leaned against him, eyelids drooping again, but soothed by the rhythm of his heartbeat. Jack closed his eyes, remembering the past like a wound that still ached. He saw Emma pale under the flickering clinic closed sign, her hand slipping from his grasp. The echoes of that night had lived inside him, as persistent as the cough that had brought him here. This time he had acted. This time, kindness would bloom instead of wither. Mia stirred and Jack opened his eyes. She peered up at him, eyelashes resting on rosy cheeks. "You made a big choice," she said, voice muffled. He brushed a kiss against her hair. "Sometimes you have to choose what's right, not just what helps you." A hush had settled over the room. The digital board still read Miller Room 3, even though the slot had transferred. Jack didn't care. He focused on Mia's steady breathing, on how her small chest rose and fell. Beyond the double doors, he heard the soft rush of wheels and the distant murmur of medical staff. He allowed himself to hope. Across the room, he caught the mechanic's eyes. The man nodded once curtly, as if acknowledging a silent truth. Jack managed a small smile back. It wasn't applause, but it felt like something equally profound recognition. He shifted, pressing his lips to Mia's forehead. "Sweet dreams, buddy," he whispered. He closed his eyes again, letting the antiseptic air carry the memory of his sacrifice. In that quiet cocoon, Jack realized that life often demanded a price. Sometimes that price was a seat in an ER queue. Sometimes it was endurance or sacrifice or even heartbreak. But when you paid it willingly without fanfare, you discovered something remarkable. Humanity's true currency was compassion. And in that moment, still wrapped in Mia's warmth, surrounded by the waiting room's softened hum, Jack Miller felt richer than he had in years. Jack settled back into the vinyl seat, Mia's small body finally surrendering to sleep against his chest. The rhythmic thrum of her breathing was a soft promise of life, renewed every inhale and exhale, a precious heartbeat. Yet beneath that fragile serenity stirred a familiar ache, guilt. It pulsed through Jack's veins like electricity, bright and searing. He closed his eyes and let the antiseptic tang of the waiting room fade, drawing him back to another night, another ER one now etched into his soul forever. He was 10 steps behind Emma that evening, his hand stretched out but never quite reaching hers. The clinic's close sign had glowed in the dusk, a cruel beacon that barred them from treatment. Emma's face, pale and drawn, had twisted in pain as they turned away. Jack remembered the ragged sound of her coughing blood flecked on her lips like shards of glass. He had pleaded with the receptionist, voice raw, promising any payment, any proof of insurance, even offering his wallet in outstretched desperation. But the staff shook their heads, leaning back into the safety of protocol. By the time they found a hospital with an open intake desk, Emma's eyes had rolled back, her breath catching in gurgling spasms. Jack had cradled her in the back of the ambulance, his fingers pressed to her wrist, searching for any sign of life. The world had dissolved into motions, paramedics shouting, the sirens slicing through the night, his own shouts of "Stay with me, please," until so very abruptly it all stopped. He saw her then slumped on a bench in the ER lobby, her hand sliding away from his, her body growing ice beneath the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. He remembered the nurse stepping over Emma's still form without a backward glance as if she were invisible. And in that moment, something fractured inside Jack, a piece of himself forever lost to the cavernous silence that followed her last breath. Now with Mia asleep in his arms, Jack felt that old wound reopen. He remembered the smell of antiseptic wash through him, the metamorphic chill that had swept over him as he realized it was too late. The memory of Emma's lips, just barely moving, as if forming words he never heard echoed in his mind. He had heard that lullaby cough again once, twice, before she closed her eyes for good. Jack pressed his forehead to Mia's hair, the soft strands cool beneath his brow. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered so softly that only he could hear. "I'm sorry you had to see me scared like that." She stirred but didn't wake, drifting deeper into slumber. Her breathing was stable thanks to the nurse's quick treatment, yet Jack's thoughts spun around the promise he'd made to himself in the aftermath of Emma's death. Never again would he allow helplessness to claim him. Never again would he watch someone he loved slip away because of a closed door. He thought of Olivia Bennett, the stranger now hurtling towards surgery, and the way no one else had moved to help her. Jack's own body had been a barricade between Mia and the waiting room's indifference, but his heart had led him forward. He had stood in defiance of assumption and apathy, and in that moment of sacrifice of giving Mia's spot to a bleeding woman, he'd wrested power back from that old guilt. This time compassion had been stronger than fear. The ER's fluorescent hum was a lullaby of a different kind, steady, unrelenting. Jack listened to it, letting the buzz of light fall over him like a shroud. He wondered how many people had walked through those doors, suffering in silence, only to be dismissed. The queue almost always moved too slowly, the staff too busy, the protocols too rigid. He saw now that a single act of kindness could puncture that rigid shell, could force the world to slow, even if just for a moment. He opened his eyes, glancing at the clock above the reception desk, 1:15 a.m. Their number hadn't flashed yet, but the gurney's wheels had long since disappeared into the inner corridors. Jack imagined Olivia's pale face on the hospital bed, surrounded by a flurry of doctors and nurses, life being wrested back from the brink by the very system that had almost failed her. A hand landed softly on his arm. He looked down to see the nurse who'd transferred the slot to Olivia. She knelt beside him, voice low. "Your daughter's stable now," she said, glancing at the chart clipped to her clipboard. "They'll get her in soon." Jack nodded, grateful. He offered a tired smile. "Thank you." He sat up straighter, cradling Mia in the crook of his arm. He noticed the nurse's eyes flick to Mia's face, then back to his. There was a gentleness there, an acknowledgement of shared humanity that Jack had almost forgotten existed. The nurse rose and slipped away, leaving Jack to his vigil. He studied Mia's face, the curve of her cheek, the way her lips parted ever so slightly with each breath. She was unconsciously teaching him something, that life in its most fragile moments was also its most resilient. A child's heart, even when tethered to a broken father, could still find room for courage. Jack closed his eyes again, letting himself drift into that memory of Emma's final cry. It was a ghost he had carried for so long, a sorrow that had defined him more than any other chapter of his life. Yet here in the hush of the ER, with the soft weight of Mia against him, he sensed a shift. Guilt was no longer his master, he was. He opened his eyes to the waiting room's muted swirl. A few patients lounged in stillness, a father cradling his infant, an elderly woman adjusting her shawl, a teenager with headphones lost in some distant world. They were strangers to him, yet connected by the shared vulnerability of illness and emergency. Jack realized he was part of something larger, a tapestry of human need and compassion threaded together by moments of connection. He caught sight of the digital board flickering Miller Room 3. Relief washed over him in a hot rush, but he held it back. Before that number would have been his salvation. Tonight it was the next step in a promise fulfilled. He rose slowly, careful of Mia's head lolling in his arms. The vinyl seat made a soft squeak as he stood. "You ready, kiddo?" he murmured, voice husky but steady. Mia's hand reached up, brushing his chin. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "Let's go get you help." He walked toward the nurse's desk, each step echoing his purpose. The world still teemed with uncertainty, still demanded faith in the unseen. But Jack felt a solidity beneath his feet, a quiet conviction born of heartache and redemption. He slid into the exam room doorway, Mia's form resting lightly against his chest. The nurse offered a warm smile, and Jack met it with one of his own. As the door closed behind them, shielding Mia's rest from the murmur of the lobby, Jack Miller breathed in the sterile air. He would never forget Emma's final night, nor the emptiness that followed. But in that moment, he carried something new inside him, the unshakable knowledge that compassion could conquer guilt, and that a father's sacrifice rooted in love could chart a path toward healing for both himself and his daughter. Dr. Carter's footsteps pounded down the corridor like a drumbeat, each click of his shoes echoing urgency through the hospital's hushed halls. He rounded the corner so fast he nearly collided with a gurney crew pushing a patient in the other direction. Without pausing to breathe, he thrust open the swinging doors to the ER lobby, tension coiling in every line of his scrubs. "Who brought her in?" He barked, voice sharp enough to halt the clock on the wall. The nurse behind the admissions desk looked up, startled. Her fingers hovered over the tablet screen. Mr. Miller, room 3, she stammered, glancing toward Jack and Mia seated against the far wall. Dr. Carter's eyes flicked to Jack for a fleeting moment, a tall man with weary shoulders cradling his daughter, then back to the tablet. With a single tap, the woman's chart blinked into view. Dr. Carter stared so long the nurse leaned forward, brow furrowing. He read the file header aloud, voice low but resonant, Bennett Olivia Marie. He blinked, disbelief sharpening into recognition. The name shimmered on the screen, CEO of Greenstone Medical Holdings, executive director of the Greenstone Foundation. The very foundation whose millions had funded this hospital's expansion, whose donation had kept the ER doors open when budgets threatened to close them. For a heartbeat, the world around Dr. Carter narrowed to the glowing text. He saw the date of birth. The address, the code for critical care data that suddenly felt less like numbers and more like stakes in a high-wire act. The nurse watched his face, perplexed by the sudden color draining from his cheeks. He swallowed hard and, as though afraid to speak too loudly, said, She's the Foundation's patron." A murmur rippled through the lobby like a wave crashing against rocks. Patients turned in their seats, cell phones paused mid-swipe, and conversations faded into silence. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to drop an octave. Jack, still nestled against Mia's shoulder, felt the atmosphere shift. The tiny hairs on the back of his neck stood guard. He glanced at the board above the desk, Miller Room 3. Even that announcement felt dwarfed by the new gravity in the room. Dr. Carter straightened, regaining composure with a surgeon's precision. He tapped the tablet again, summoning the nurse's attention. "Get me the administrator." Now he ordered, voice calm but humming with urgency. The nurse nodded, fingers flying across the screen to dial. Others in the lobby strained to hear. Jack's daughter stirred one small hand, reaching for his. He pressed a gentle kiss to her palm, offering quiet reassurance. Mia blinked up at him, eyelashes heavy, but trust unbroken. Jack gave a slight nod, as if to say, "I've got you." And in that moment, he was more than a father seeking care. He was a catalyst in a chain reaction he hadn't yet understood. The receptionist answered the page, and Dr. Carter excused himself, disappearing back through the doors that led to the inner sanctum of the ER. In his wake, the lobby dissolved into low whispers. A young man in a cargo jacket leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Bennett, like the Foundation." The woman nodded, eyes wide. An older couple glanced at each other, mouths tight with curiosity. Jack listened to the shift in tone, something electric and foreign, and glanced at Mia. She was watching him with quiet intensity, as if reading the same question he wore on his brow. "What just happened?" He swallowed, tracing the scar on his own wrist, a remnant of a months-old fall on the job. This wasn't his world. He was a construction worker, a guy who patched holes and broke down walls, not a man accustomed to the reverberations of high-finance philanthropy. Yet here he was, at the fulcrum of a story that transcended his everyday life. A moment later, Dr. Carter reemerged, flanked by a sharply dressed woman Jack didn't recognize and another nurse. The woman's precise heels tapped confidentially against the tile floor. She carried herself with corporate authority, an air of someone used to boardrooms rather than sterile hallways. Dr. Carter cleared his throat, drawing every eye in the room. "Mr. Miller," he called out, voice steady now. Jack shifted, lifting Mia slightly so she could see. Dr. Carter gestured for Jack to follow him. The lobby's hush deepened. Patients rose from their chairs, craning their necks, as if the world beyond the double doors held some clandestine revelation worth watching. Jack stood heart-pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wrapped a protective arm around Mia, ready to move at a moment's notice. Dr. Carter led them through the sliding doors, the sharp click marking another boundary crossed from the public arena of waiting to a place of private urgency. In the narrow hallway beyond, the corporate woman caught Jack's eye. "I'm Claire Donovan, Greenstone Foundation Operations Director," she said, extending a hand. Jack hesitated, then shook it. Her grip was firm, businesslike, but her gaze held an unexpected warmth, an acknowledgement of his deed, whatever his name might mean to their world. Dr. Carter cleared his throat again. "Mr. Miller, thank you for your quick action. You're the reason Ms. Bennett is alive right now." The words cut through Jack's chest like cold steel. He pressed Mia closer, blinking back surprise. Dr. Carter opened a side door, revealing a short corridor lined with charts and medical equipment. "Please, come through here. We've been monitoring her closely." Jack stepped inside, the cool air pressing against his damp clothes. He followed Dr. Carter and Ms. Donovan past rooms labeled triage and trauma, each door leading to lives hanging in the balance. Olivia Bennett's room lay at the end, a heavy door marked critical care. Dr. Carter sighed, then placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "She'll need surgery," he said quietly. "High-risk ulcer perforation. We're prepping the OR now." Jack swallowed, the weight of guilt and relief tangling in his chest. He nodded, remembering Mia's whimpers earlier, the hush of the waiting room, the surge of protectiveness that had propelled him into action. For the first time that night, he wondered what it felt like to be on the other side, to be a different kind of stranger, one whose pulse dictated millions in funding. Claire Donovan gestured to a pair of chairs outside Olivia's room. Jack settled into one, Mia in his lap, and felt the world narrow to her uneven breaths. Dr. Carter lingered at the doorway, tying his shoelace, an unconscious imitation of routine in the face of chaos. Finally, the door swung open, and Dr. Carter stepped out, scrub cap in hand. "The operation went well," he announced, voice measured with relief. "She's stable in recovery. It was touch and go, but—" He allowed himself a brief smile. "Your timing was impeccable. You literally saved her life." Jack exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. He stroked Mia's hair, tears prickling at the edges of his vision. The hallway lights gleamed overhead, sterile and unyielding. But Jack's world had shifted. He had stepped into the current of something powerful, a life saved, a fortune spared, a foundation's namesake, rescued from the brink. Claire Donovan approached, placing a gentle hand on Jack's arm. "Mr. Miller." She began, voice softer now. "Ms. Bennett is insistent on meeting with you as soon as she's awake. She wants to thank you personally." Jack frowned. Processing. He stammered, I didn't do it for thanks. I just did what needed to be done." She offered a kind smile. "I know." She paused, her gaze steady. "But sometimes it's important for people to hear that from the heart." Jack nodded slowly. He looked down at Mia, breathing sound, and even now oblivious to the corporate undercurrent swirling just beyond her grasp. He kissed her forehead, then met Claire's eyes. "I'm just glad she's going to be okay," he said, voice rough. "That's enough for me." Claire inclined her head. "I understand." She stepped back, giving him space. Dr. Carter rejoined them, adjustments made to his surgical mask. "You should go rest," he advised. "You and your daughter have been through a lot tonight." Jack swallowed, a weary smile forming. "Thank you, doctor." He stood, easing Mia from his lap and carrying her toward the corridor that led back to the lobby. Each footstep felt lighter now, buoyed by relief and a curious sense of anticipation. Behind him, the hospital staff prepared charts, adjusted monitors, and whispered about the CEO's miraculous rescue. Jack glanced over his shoulder at the closed doors of critical care, breathing in the antiseptic air as if it were fresh rain. He thought of Emma's final moments, of the hollow guilt that had haunted him since, and realized that tonight's choice had woven him into a new tapestry, one where compassion overrode fear, where a father's sacrifice could change destinies. And as he stepped back into the lobby's soft glow, cradling Mia once more, Jack Miller knew their lives had been forever altered by the ripple of a single act of kindness. Jack stepped into Olivia's room, the door swinging closed behind him with a soft click that muffled the hospital's distant hum. Mia, her eyelids drooping but still alert, sat nestled against his hip, one arm looped around his neck. The room's pale walls were warmed by the glow of a single lamp on the bedside table, its light dancing across the clean sheets and glinting off the polished IV stand. For a moment, Jack felt as though he'd slipped into another world, one where power and wealth faded into irrelevance beside the fragile pulse of human life. Olivia lay propped against a bank of pillows, her hair still damp around her face, tendrils clinging to her cheeks. Beneath the surgical mask pulled down to rest at her chin, her lips curved in a half smile, both gratitude and something more unreadable. His chest swelled at the sight of her vulnerability. All afternoon he'd known her as the formidable CEO of Greenstone Medical Holdings, a woman whose decisions could tip the fate of entire hospitals. But here in the hush of her recovery room, she was simply a patient who'd stumbled through the ER doors pale and bleeding in search of care. She lifted a trembling hand, fingernails chipped little details that had nothing to do with stock reports or foundation budgets. Her voice emerged soft, almost a whisper. "You stayed." Jack shifted Mia so she could press her head against his shoulder. "I did what any father would," he replied, voice low. His own words sounded hollow, habitual. Everything in him wanted to add, "I'm not special," but the knot of tension in Olivia's eyes stopped him. Instead, he drew in a slow breath and waited. A spark of something surprise, respect flickered in Olivia's gaze. She studied him closely as though measuring each line on his face, each callus on his hand. "Most wouldn't," she said quietly. Her words settled around him like a benediction. Jack looked down at Mia, whose eyelids drooped once more, and out through the window to the parking lot below. Rain had tapered to a hush, turning the asphalt slick and dark. The city's neon lights reflected in puddles like fractured jewels. He felt both unseen and hyper-visible, a man whose single act of kindness had stirred the currents of wealth and power just beyond those drapes. He swallowed. "I couldn't stand by," he said. "You needed help." Olivia closed her eyes as though gathering the strength to speak again. When she opened them, her gray-blue irises shone with an intensity that belied her weakened state. "It wasn't just help," she murmured. "It was recognition." She reached up, resting her fingertips against the mask, then peeled it away. Jack caught the trace of blood at her lips' corner and felt his heart tighten. He found himself wishing he could draw the pain out of her body, trade places, somehow restore her energy. "You recognized me," she said, tone almost wistful. "You saw me not as a donor or a name, but as a human being who needed someone to care." Jack shifted, uncomfortably aware that his jeans and damp jacket felt ridiculous in this soft-lit sanctuary. He cleared his throat. "I don't think of you as anyone other than someone in pain." He paused, touching the back of his neck. "My daughter." He glanced down to Mia, who stirred awake. "She's taught me that even the smallest voice matters." Olivia watched him, a flicker of emotion passing across her features. "She's wise," Olivia said. "Children see through the noise." Jack offered a wry smile. "They have to. Otherwise they wouldn't survive." He cradled Mia under one arm and eased onto the edge of the visitor's chair. The vinyl squeaked beneath him, but the sound seemed to belong here, familiar, honest. Mia blinked up at him, eyes bright. Jack brushed a stray curl from her forehead. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "You doing okay?" She nodded, curling her small fingers into his shirt. "I'm okay," she whispered. "Daddy, I think she's going to be okay too." Jack felt a lump in his throat. He glanced back at Olivia, who had closed her eyes once more, exhaustion etched onto her brow. She lay still, breathing steadily, as if bracing herself for each breath. Jack studied the rise and fall of her chest and thought of the gurney wheels sliding away the blur of the waiting room the moment he'd made his choice. It replayed in his mind like a slow-motion film, the nurse's confused stare, his own steady voice insisting she take his spot. He'd done it without thought of reward, guided by instinct, and Mia's quiet plea. Olivia stirred again, lifting her head on a slow inhale. Tell me about her, she said, nodding toward Mia. Jack hesitated, then let a tenderness flood his face. That's my daughter Mia. He reached down to brush her cheek. She's 6, loves pancakes, fireflies, and anything with glitter. He chuckled softly. She thinks every sunset is a show. Mia giggled, her voice sweet and clear in the hushed room. Olivia smiled a real smile that creased the corners of her eyes. She's beautiful, Olivia said. She reached for Jack's hand, weak but insistent. He wrapped his fingers around hers, noting the lightness of her grip. Thank you for saving her first, then staying for me. Jack blinked back a sheen of moisture. I couldn't do one without the other, he whispered. She's my heart. A silence stretched between them, comfortable, sacred. Jack stared at Olivia's hand in his, the pale skin set against his darker fingers. It was an exchange of souls in that instant, gratitude transferred, humanity acknowledged. He felt a warmth spread through him, the glow of having done something good in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. After a moment, he cleared his throat. I should let you rest, he said, voice catching. He stood sitting Mia on his hip once more. Olivia nodded, exhaustion reclaiming her posture. Jack rose fully and stood by the bedside, awkward in her space, yet drawn by an unspoken bond. He searched for words to capture the depth of her gratitude of the moment they shared, but nothing seemed adequate. Instead, he offered a simple nod. Get well soon, he said. Olivia watched him with eyes that held soft respect. I will, she promised, because you saw me. Jack turned to leave, pausing at the door. He glanced back once more, and their eyes met. In hers, he saw a shimmer of something unspoken, perhaps hope, perhaps a recognition that their lives were forever entwined by that single act in the ER lobby. He closed the door gently behind him, the click softer than before, and stepped back into the fluorescent corridor. The lights felt harsh after the room's soft glow, but Jack felt steadier than he had in days. He carried Mia toward the exit, each footstep affirming what he'd always believed, that small decisions could carry immense power, and that kindness, once given freely, had a way of illuminating the darkest places. Jack paused at the weathered green door of the Pinewood Community Hub and took a steadying breath. Rain had finally ceased, leaving the air thick with the scent of damp earth and fresh paint. Inside, the high-ceilinged room buzzed with conversation. Folding chairs circled worn tables layered with hand-drawn posters, brightly colored flyers, and mismatched mugs brimming with coffee and water. A rack of children's jackets slung over a radiator warmed the entryway, and the sound of low music drifted from the back office. Jack shifted the strap of Mia's backpack on his shoulder. She was perched on his hip legs, swinging eyes wide as she took in the scene. Volunteers greeted them with warm smiles and nods. He felt conspicuous in his damp work boots and paint-splattered jeans, but Claire Donovan's invitation had been clear. No corporate towers, no suits. Just real people, real problems, and he hoped real solutions. At the far end of the room, under a banner proclaiming Roots Rebuilt Building Community from the ground up, Olivia Bennett stood beside a long table. She'd swapped her hospital gown for dark jeans and a simple blouse, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail, a few damp strands framing her face. Despite the past trauma she'd endured, her posture was unbowed, and her gaze was steady as she greeted Jack and Mia. Jack Miller, she said, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. He took her hand, gentle but firm. Mia reached out with one small finger brushing Olivia's palm. Olivia knelt to meet Mia's gaze. And this must be Mia. Hi there. Mia offered a tiny wave, then buried her face in Jack's shoulder. Jack cleared his throat. Thanks for inviting us. Olivia straightened and motioned toward 2 empty chairs near the table where a laptop was open and several notebooks lay stacked. I hope it wasn't too much trouble, she said, voice genuine. I wanted to meet here someplace real somewhere, kids laughing and people helping each other. She patted the table. This is the hub. We use it for after-school programs, job workshops, community dinners. Today it's where we talk about making this place stronger. Jack glanced around. A few dozen neighbors, elderly couples, young parents, teenagers milled in small groups. Paint-stained hands sketched mural designs on a whiteboard. The raw energy felt different from boardrooms he'd imagined. Here, the stakes were measured in friendships formed and meals shared, not quarterly reports. Olivia settled into one chair and patted the seat beside her. Jack lowered himself there, Mia still clinging to his other arm. He laid her on his lap so he could free both hands. She yawned and curled into a nap, lulled by the gentle hum. Olivia let her gaze drift over Mia before meeting Jack's eyes again. "I wanted to talk to you," she began. "About what happened in the ER and about what comes next." Jack nodded slowly. "I did what any father would do," he said, voice low. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know why you say that. But it wasn't just any father. You chose to help someone you didn't know, someone who could never repay you. And that act, it revealed something deeper." She tapped at her open notebook. "I've thought a lot about why I came to that ER alone that night. I wasn't looking for attention. I just wanted to really see how the system my family funds actually works on the ground." Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't know much about how large foundations run, but I know about waiting rooms. I know what it's like to be told to wait until you don't matter anymore." Olivia's shoulders dipped slightly, as if relieved by his understanding. "Exactly. I wanted to learn from people like you, people whose lives don't revolve around spreadsheets and press releases. I wanted truth, not glossy reports." Jack's gaze drifted to a group of teens painting a mural of a tree with deep roots and flourishing branches, the phrase "stronger together" scrawled beneath. "This is impressive," he said, nodding. "You're doing good work here." She glanced at the mural, pride flickering in her eyes. "It's just the beginning, but the real test is how we scale it, how we rebuild neighborhoods all across the city, so families don't fall through the cracks." Jack folded his arms. "So what do you want from me?" Olivia leaned forward, voice earnest. "I want you on my team." She paused, letting the words settle. "I'm launching Roots Rebuilt as a pilot project in 5 neighborhoods. Pinewood is first. We need someone people trust, someone who understands construction and community." She tapped his knee. "Someone who isn't afraid to roll up their sleeves." Jack's breath caught. He had never worked beyond construction crews and odd jobs. His world was drywall and demolition, not community development. "I appreciate that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "but I'm no strategist. I don't know grant writing or fundraising or program management." Olivia shook her head. "You don't need a degree. You need integrity and credibility. When you speak, people listen because they know you've lived their struggles. That's rare." She fixed him with a steady look. "I want you to lead the Southside site, hire local workers, coordinate volunteers, ensure the building designs reflect what families actually need." Jack stared at her, processing. He thought of Emma of the small clinic that turned her away. He thought of Mia's wheezing breaths in the ER. "You're asking me to manage a project?" he said slowly. "Yes," Olivia replied firmly. "Not from an office, from here on the ground. You'll have support, legal, administrative funding, but you'll be the one folks turn to." She gestured to a binder on the table. "This has the preliminary plans, budgets, timelines. It's rough, but it's a start." Jack glanced at the binder's cover, Roots Rebuilt Pinewood Initiative, Phase 1. He opened it to see hand-drawn maps, colored post-it notes, notes in the margins. Hire locally, community input session. After-school space. Medical outreach. The pages felt honest, not polished. It spoke of potential and imperfections. Mia stirred awake, blinking at the overhead lights. Jack scooped her close, brushing her hair behind her ear. "What about her?" he asked, nodding toward Olivia. "Is it safe for a 6-year-old around a construction site?" Olivia smiled, reaching into a tote bag to pull out a stack of hard hats in child sizes. She set one in Jack's lap. "We thought of that. We're partnering with parent schools. The first build days will be controlled, no heavy equipment in the play areas. Kid zones will be separate. Safety is everything." Jack felt a warmth in his chest. Protecting his daughter was instinct. Knowing they had planned for that meant something. He placed the pink hard hat on Mia, whose eyes widened with delight. She pressed it against her forehead, hair escaping in tufts. Jack laughed, a full, genuine sound that felt strange in his own ears. Olivia watched them with a soft smile. "I don't want empty platitudes," she said. "I want action. Buildings that host clinics, job centers, after-school hubs, places where no one is ever turned away." She leaned back, voice steady. "But I can't do it alone." Jack held Mia in his lap, feeling the soft rise and fall of her breathing. He thought of evenings spent checking invoices, of nights patching walls of the day Emma died because a clinic's doors stayed shut. He thought of the father who gave up his spot so a stranger could live, and he thought of a chance to shape something lasting from that moment. He looked at Olivia, at the earnest set of her jaw, at the determination in her eyes. Then he closed the binder and set it gently on the table. "I'll do it," he said, voice sure. "I'll help you build it right." Olivia's face lit up relief and pride mingling in her expression. She stood and extended her hand again. Jack rose Mia in his arms and shook it. The hub seemed to swell around them with unspoken promise. Jack tapped Mia's hard hat. "What do you think, kiddo? You ready to build something?" Her eyes shone and she nodded vigorously. Olivia laughed, the sound bright in the worn room. "Welcome to Roots Rebuilt, Jack and Mia. Let's get to work." And as the afternoon sun filtered through rain-streaked windows, Jack felt a new chapter unfolding, one born from a single act of compassion now blossoming into the promise of genuine ground-up change. Jack stepped into the conference room, the door's chipped paint and simple latch, a stark contrast to the gleaming boardrooms he'd once glimpsed through TV documentaries. A long folding table filled most of the space, surrounded by a mismatched collection of chairs, some plastic, some wooden, a few borrowed from the adjacent classrooms. Light filtered in through high windows, dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. On the far wall, a hand-painted sign proclaimed, "Roots Rebuilt Community." First, the letters roughly cut but brimming with intention. Olivia Bennett rose to greet him, offering a firm handshake that seemed to say, "I trust you with this." She wore a soft flannel shirt and dark jeans, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, the only corporate touch her simple pendant, no blinding diamonds or designer logos. Behind her, a whiteboard bristled with colorful marker lines, Phase 1, Secure Site, Phase 2, Community Outreach, Phase 3, Sustainable Growth. Various sticky notes lined the edges, Local Hires After School Program. Health Clinic Wing. Jack, Olivia said, her voice warm but resolute. "Thank you for coming back. I know you have a lot on your plate." Jack cradled Mia in his arms, her head lolled against his chest, asleep after a long morning of excited chatter. He leaned against the wall, every muscle humming with anticipation and nerves. "I wouldn't miss it," he said, eyes drifting to the whiteboard. This is impressive." Olivia smiled, a hint of relief flickering in her eyes. "It's a start, but I need someone to lead it, someone who knows what it means to build day in and day out, someone who people trust to see the work through." Jack's gaze settled on the local hires note. He swallowed. "I appreciate that, but I don't know if I'm the guy for this. I'm a construction worker, not a strategist or community organizer." He shifted, feeling the weight of Mia's tiny body and the responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Olivia folded her hands on the table. "Strategy can be learned. Policies and permits, there are people to guide you through all that. What you have is something they can't teach." Jack met her eyes, puzzled. "Credibility?" he asked softly. She nodded. Walk into a meeting with residents who've been told for years that help is coming, often never arrives. They've heard platitudes and empty promises, but when someone from their own neighborhood shows up, someone who's stood on their stoops, who's broken his back to earn a living, they listen. That credibility is gold. It's what makes change possible. He ran a hand through his damp hair, recalling the first time he'd met those neighbors. Crumbling sidewalks, boarded-up storefronts, children playing in puddles by the road. The memory made his chest ache. "I've never managed a budget bigger than the one I carry on site to buy materials," he admitted. "I don't have a degree in public policy." "You don't need one," Olivia said, her tone gentle but unwavering. "We'll provide training. We have grant writers, financial officers, project managers, all eager to support you. Your job is leadership, hiring the local crew, ensuring the build reflects community needs, troubleshooting on the ground." She gestured to the whiteboard. "This is our framework, but you'll be the captain of this ship." Jack glanced at the items scrawled in red marker, Community Liaison Construction. Oversight, volunteer coordination. He imagined waking up each day trading his demolition boots for a slightly more polished pair, not because he wanted to look corporate, but because he knew first impressions mattered. He thought of Mia's bright eyes and her questions about why they were helping other people. He wanted to be the kind of father whose actions matched his words. "Can you tell me more about the site?" he asked, voice steadying. What am I walking into? Olivia permitted herself a small smile. You'll be working in South Shore first, an area with boarded homes, few job opportunities, and limited access to healthcare. We've secured a parcel of land near the old logistics warehouse. The plan is to demolish a few unsafe buildings, build a small clinic wing, an after-school center, and a job skills workshop. It'll be modular to start with room for expansion. She flipped the whiteboard to reveal a map drawn in black marker blocks of homes, a main road, a park. That green rectangle is the hub. We'll break ground in 6 weeks once permits clear. But between now and then, I want you to host listening sessions 2 evenings a week to gather input. I want neighbors to feel ownership. Jack leaned closer, tracing the map's lines. The school playground where Mia once played. The corner store with broken windows. The vacant lot where kids race their bikes. It's a lot, he said quietly. What if I mess up? Olivia's expression softened. Mistakes will happen. That's part of the process. But you'll own up to them. You'll fix them. You'll show people that their concerns matter. That's how trust grows. He nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words settle in his bones. What about the funding? He asked. How do we ensure the money goes where it's intended? She reached for a binder on the far end of the table and slid it toward him. Transparent accounting, she said. We publish monthly reports online and at the hub. Every dollar tracked. Any resident can request a ledger. We want 0 surprises. Jack flipped open the binder, skimming columns of numbers and notes. He saw line items for materials, staff, outreach events. It was meticulous but approachable, far from the opaque budgets he'd imagined might hide in corporate offices. And volunteers, he asked, turning another page. Olivia tapped the margin. We have partnerships with local nonprofits. They'll coordinate volunteer training. You'll help schedule teams, local high schoolers, tradespeople, neighbors with any skill. Everyone can contribute. He closed the binder with a soft thud. The room felt charged, full of possibility. He thought of Emma, of the doors slammed shut in her face, of the helplessness that had followed him like a shadow. He realized this was more than bricks and mortar. It was an opportunity to build a barrier against that helplessness for his daughter and for families just like his own. Jack took a breath and looked at Olivia, her eyes bright with conviction. He thought of the way she'd insisted on meeting him here among the people rather than behind boardroom glass. He thought of the countless small gestures that had led him to this moment, offering his ER spot, cradling Mia, facing down his own guilt. He straightened, feeling the weight of potential settle into something more potent responsibility. I'm in, he said, voice low but firm. Mia stirred, blinking sleepily at him. He scooped her gently into his arms. I'll lead the site, he continued, meeting Olivia's gaze. I'll handle the hiring, the sessions, the builds. I'll own the mistakes and fix them. Olivia's face lit up with a mix of relief and pride. She extended her hand again and Jack shook it this time as an equal partner. Welcome aboard, she said, her smile genuine. We've got work to do. Jack nodded, surveying the humble conference room with new eyes. Here in this worn space filled with handmade signs and earnest faces, he felt a spark of purpose ignite. With Mia asleep in his arms, he turned to the window, watching sunlight flicker across the mural outside. He knew the road ahead would be hard: permits, budgets, community tensions, but he also knew that this time he wasn't just building walls. He was building hope. And for the first time in a long while, Jack Miller believed that hope could hold strong roots deep enough to weather any storm. Jack woke before dawn, the cold seeping through his coat as he drove the final few blocks to the Pinewood Southside lot. Frost clung to the chain-link fence and his breath puffed in misty clouds as he unloaded shovels and hard hats from the back of his truck. The ground itself was frozen solid, a stubborn reminder that good work doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Mia's pink hard hat sat in the cab, though Jack knew she wouldn't be here today, not in this first gritty step toward transformation. Today was about the people who built this place. By sunrise, neighbors and volunteers gathered in a loose semicircle on the vacant lot. Some wore worn parkas and mittens, others jeans dusted with yesterday's demolition debris. Olivia stood quietly at Jack's side, jeans and flannel. Once more, no banner or podium in sight. She gave him a small nod, hands tucked into her coat pockets, an anchor of calm amid the flurry of anticipation. Jack surveyed the crowd, Mrs. Delgado, the retired nurse who'd taught first aid classes, Luis and Marisol, teenagers from the high school with freshly pressed volunteer forms, Mr. Jenkins, the corner store owner whose shop had provided coffee and donuts to keep volunteers warm, and dozens more whose faces held a mixture of skepticism and hope. This lot had been empty too long. Broken glass, rusted fencing, and stray tires littered the edge. Today they would break that cycle. He cleared his throat, hands gripping the shovel's shaft. Coffee cups clinked in half-frozen fingers, and the low hum of conversation quieted. Jack remembered the first time he'd seen this land, overgrown weeds and puddles so deep they swallowed sneakers. Back then he'd been a stranger, a construction worker parachuting into a community wary of big promises. Now he belonged here. "Thanks for coming out this morning." Jack began, voice firm despite the cold. He brushed frosted hair from his forehead. "I know it's early, I know it's freezing." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. But nobody ever built something important from their couch. He tapped the shovel blade against the frozen ground. "This lot has been empty for years, and we're here to change that. Today, with your help, we break ground on a clinic wing, a learning center, and a job skills workshop. But more than that, we break ground on trust." On his left, Olivia squeezed his shoulder, reinforcing his words with her presence. Jack met her eyes and felt the weight of her support give him courage. Over the past weeks, they'd worked together permitting headaches, scheduled juggling budget updates, and they'd done it honestly, transparently. Here they'd earned credibility by showing up, by listening, by including every voice. He straightened, inhaling the frost-tinged air. "When I stepped into your community, I was just a guy with a hard hat and a shovel. Now, I'm still that guy. Only I know your names, your stories, your dreams for your families." He let silence settle, letting the truth of his words sink in. "This project isn't mine. It's ours. Every board we install, every brick we lay will carry your fingerprints." Murmurs of agreement drifted through the group. Mrs. Delgado wiped condensation from her glasses and gave Jack a nod. Luis' arms crossed against the cold, stepped forward and held out his hand. Jack shook it, feeling the teen's quiet pride in being part of something bigger than themselves. That handshake meant more than any contract. Without another word, Jack hefted the shovel and jammed its blade into the earth. The frozen ground groaned under the sudden impact, and a shard of soil cracked free. The crowd leaned in as Jack lifted the clump of dirt and tossed it aside. Olivia joined him, picking up another shovel. Together they swung in unison, spalling frost-caked soil into the clear air. A cheer rose, muffled by mittens but loud in the ache of muscles long unused to exertion. Volunteers rushed forward with shovels of their own. Ms. Henderson from the daycare, the two parents who'd organized carpool routes, even the high school football coach, his breath steaming in the chill. Jack guided them to a row of stakes marking the clinic's footprint. He knelt, brushing frozen earth from a stake, and explained, voice carrying. "This wing will give everyone a place to see a doctor without fear of cost or judgment. It'll have exam rooms, a waiting area with real chairs, not steel benches." A woman in the front row whispered to her neighbor, "I'll bring my kids here." Jack felt his heart expand. That was the goal. People saying our clinic, envisioning it, transforming a theory into a promise. He straightened, spat a bit of frozen crust from his lip, and turned to Olivia. Next he called the learning center. He pointed down the lot where fresh stakes glimmered in sunrise. Olivia grabbed the nearest shovel and led the charge, her sleeves collecting mud as she drove her blade in. Throughout the morning, they rotated tasks, digging footings, moving gravel, tapping rebar into place. Jack moved among them, showing Mrs. Delgado where the first foundation would lie, helping Luis steady the post-hole auger, chatting with Mr. Jenkins about how the new center could host health fairs. Each interaction was a stitch in the fabric of trust. They were weaving one shovel swing at a time. By late morning, the ground bore the first clear contours of the clinic foundation. Dirt heaped beside each trench like pale testament to the work begun. Jack wiped sweat, yes, sweat on his pants, blinking against the bright glare of the sun on frosted edges. He surveyed the progress tables of boot shovels leaning against stakes, coffee thermoses half empty but still warm. He felt the hum of momentum, a living pulse in the bulldozed landscape. Olivia approached, flapping her gloves free of frost. She pulled a flask of hot tea from her pocket and handed it to Jack. He took a long sip, chest warming from the inside out. "You did good," she said, voice soft but proud. Jack tilted the flask and offered her a sip. She accepted, lifting her face to the sun. This is just the beginning, she said. He nodded. I know. He set the flask aside and looked around. The group was taking a break, stretching cramped muscles, trading stories. Jack caught a snippet of a conversation. I never thought I'd help build something like this, one neighbor said. Yeah, another replied. But look at us now. Jack's throat tightened. That was the reward, the genuine surprise of making real change. Mia's bright hat bobbed toward him. She'd come to watch, perched on a parent's shoulders, eyes wide with excitement, as volunteers tossed clumps of earth. Jack waved and she waved back, shouting, Daddy, my building! His heart swelled at her pride. This project was for her future, for the future of every child in Pinewood, for families who deserved a community they could trust. Jack picked up the shovel again, balancing its weight. The morning sun had chased away most of the frost. The earth had softened. He knelt by his own personal marker, an orange stake labeled Volunteer Hub. He placed his glove-clad hand on the stake as if making a vow. The soil gave way under his palm. He scooped a handful and let it fall through his fingers. Every nod, every handshake, every shovel swing, he murmured, standing and letting the sound carry. We're cementing trust stronger than concrete. He raised the shovel high, and with a grin brought it down for another swing. The lot answered him with the sound of trust-breaking ground echoing into a new dawn for Pinewood's south side. The hammering of nails and chime of power tools had barely tapered off when the sharp crack of rubber on concrete sliced through the construction noise. Jack looked up just in time to see a boy tumble from his bicycle wheels, spinning off into the gravel. The child lay on the ground, face down, one arm splayed at an odd angle. Muddy footprints splashed through the shallow puddles around the unfinished clinic's makeshift entrance. Volunteers froze. The site supervisor cursed under his breath. But Jack didn't hesitate. He dropped his shovel, sprinted forward, and knelt beside the boy. Easy, buddy, Jack said, voice calm but urgent. He placed a hand on the child's back. I'm Jack. Can you tell me your name? The boy's blonde hair was matted with sweat and rain. He lifted a tear-streaked cheek. Miles, he whispered, voice small. It hurts. Jack glanced toward the partially framed walls where drywall sheets leaned against steel studs and windows gaped like empty eyes. The clinic wing was only hours from its groundbreaking ceremony, its exam rooms still just concrete pads and upended buckets. But tonight this spot would serve as the first triage point. He caught sight of a nurse hustling across the lot, dark scrubs tucked into muddy boots. It was Sophia Reyes, the retired ER nurse who'd volunteered to run basic health workshops here. She bent beside Jack, her stethoscope bouncing on her chest. Let me see, she said softly, already unbuttoning the front of Miles's jacket. Jack held the boy's shoulder gently. What happened? Miles winced. I hit that. He pointed to a steel stake marking the future reception desk. And then I flew. Sophia's fingers pressed along Miles's forearm. A grimace flickered across her face. That's a displaced fracture. Looks like the radius. She glanced at Jack, tone low. We've got to immobilize it before it bleeds into the tissue. Jack nodded. Got it. He stood and shouted to nearby volunteers. We need 2 2x4s and some rope now. 2 young men, Luis and Marcus, rushed over, hauling wood and a coil of nylon cord. Jack examined the fracture, then placed the 2x4s on either side of the boy's forearm. Sophia tied the rope in a figure 8 around wrist and elbow, snug enough to stabilize but not cut off circulation. Jack held Miles's hand, murmuring encouragement. Rain dripped from the upended sheets overhead, but neither of them flinched. In that moment, they were simply caregiver and child builder and nurse, united by the sudden urgency of saving a life. Can you wiggle your fingers? Sophia asked once the splint was secure. Miles flexed his small hand thumb, trembling but obeying. Yeah, he said, relief lacing his voice. Jack wiped a strand of hair from Miles's forehead. That's good. You did great. He ruffled the boy's hair mud and sawdust, sprinkling the floor. Meanwhile, the paramedic truck that had been stuck in traffic on 67th Avenue finally roared into the lot, brakes squealing as it bounced over stones. 2 EMTs hopped out, equipment bags in hand, eyes widening at the improvised treatment area. One medic knelt beside Jack and Sophia, admiration already flickering in his gaze. You stabilized him perfectly, he said. Did he tell you what happened? He crashed into the marker stake, Jack replied. We're set for transport. The EMT gently lifted Miles onto a stretcher, sliding the board beneath him. The boy blinked up at Jack. Thank you, he whispered. Jack offered a reassuring smile. Get well soon, champ. As the ambulance doors closed, Sophia exhaled, brushing rain from her sleeve. I've never seen a splint so neatly done in an unfinished building, she teased lightly. Jack shrugged, but pride warmed his features. You taught me well. Behind them, Olivia Bennett stood framed in the clinic's doorway, her silhouette backlit by the dull glow of the setting sun. Her coat was dust-smeared sleeves rolled up. She'd come to oversee the first construction milestone, but stayed for the human moment. Now pride and relief mingled in her expression. She stepped forward, voice soft enough to blend with the echo of the ambulance siren fading down the street. Jack. He looked up Mia now, tucked under his arm, after she'd insisted on helping, resting against his shoulder. Hey, he answered. Olivia walked over, kneeling to meet the beam of Jack's flashlight beneath the clinic's half-built walls. That was incredible, she said, voice hushed. I've planned community health programs for years, but tonight, you made a clinic real in a way no grant ever could. Jack studied her face, sweat and dirt streaked through her hair. It wasn't just me, he replied. It was Sophia, and every volunteer who grabbed a board. We all did it. Olivia nodded, then reached out to gently brush a smudge from Mia's cheek. The little girl blinked up at her, curious. You were very brave, Olivia told Mia. Mia shrugged, settling into Jack's arms. I watched Daddy help, she said. Olivia's gaze flicked back to Jack. You helped more than build walls today, she said. You saved a child's arm, his chance to play again. You turned a construction site into a place of healing. Jack's chest tightened. He stared at the steel studs rising around them at the slab of concrete that would soon bear exam rooms and waiting chairs. This clinic wing, he said, voice steady, it isn't just brick and mortar. It's a promise. Tonight we kept it. Olivia rose, offering her hand. Jack stood and accepted it. The bones of their partnership strengthened by the day's unexpected trial. Behind them, the skeletal frame of the clinic seemed to glow with new purpose, not a hollow shell of future hope, but a living heart of current care. The volunteers drifted back to their tool spirits, buoyed by the evening's triumph. Laughter and chatter resumed among the rows of stakes and lumber piles. Jack hoisted Mia onto his hip and surveyed the scene, a patch of land transformed into something more than a building project. It had become proof of community trust and immediate compassion. Olivia leaned in her voice, a quiet promise. This was our first test. I think we passed. Jack smiled, scanning the faces around him. Neighbors, nurses, parents, teens, each person's eyes reflecting the flicker of hope that had taken root here. Our first triumph, he corrected, and the beginning of many more. He tucked Mia's cold fingers into his glove, then looked once more at the clinic's half-built entrance. In the glow of portable lanterns and the echo of departing sirens, Jack Miller felt the true measure of success, not in shelves stocked or walls raised, but in arms saved and futures preserved. And as the night settled over Pinewood's south side, he knew they'd proven exactly why this place, and why every life it would one day serve, mattered more than any blueprint ever could. Morning light filtered through the string lights that draped across the entrance to the Miller Family Center, painting the courtyard in a soft gold. Jack Miller stood beside Olivia Bennett on the threshold of the building they had helped bring to life, a project born from a single act of kindness in an ER waiting room. Today, there would be no grand ribbon cutting, no speeches from suited dignitaries. Instead, laughter bubbled like a spring around them as families streamed through the wide glass doors, eager to explore the place that had already begun to feel like home. Mia darted ahead, her pink hard hat tucked under one arm, clipboard in the other. This way, everyone she called, her voice carrying clear and confident. A group of 5 young girls followed obediently, their eyes bright with excitement. Mia led them down the hallway past the gleaming reception desk, where a polished wooden plaque bore the simple inscription, Miller Family Center, a place of compassion and second chances. She paused to point out a colorful mural on the wall, children holding hands beneath a sprawling tree, and then ushered her new friends into the art room where tables were already set with paints, crayons, and stacks of blank canvases. Jack watched her go, pride tightening in his chest. He saw her small shoulders squared with purpose, guiding those children just as he had guided her through so many storms. He glanced at Olivia, whose gaze followed Mia with a soft, admiring smile. Around them, the air hummed with community, the hum of hushed conversations, the rustle of children's shoes on polished floors, the clink of coffee cups on tables in the adjoining cafe area. Volunteers moved through the space, replenishing snacks, greeting parents, and offering directions with warm hellos. Olivia stepped beside Jack, slipping her hand into his. "She's perfect for it," she murmured, nodding toward Mia's retreating figure. "Just like you said." Jack squeezed her hand, feeling the echo of every shovel swing, every plan huddle, every late-night spreadsheet that had gone into this day. "She has a way of making everyone feel seen," he replied. "She reminds me why we do this." His voice caught on the last word, reminded him of Emma and the days when they had waited helpless and cold outside locked clinic doors. Today was different. Today no one waited outside. Everyone was welcomed in. They wandered through the center's open spaces, the bright after-school study lounge, where teens curled into beanbag chairs with homework packets and laptops, the freshly stocked little library, its shelves low enough for small hands, the clinic wing off the main hall where soft rainbows of light refracted through the stained glass window above the check-in desk. Nurses and doctors. Many of them volunteers from Greenstone Medical greeted patients by name, offering flu shots or routine checkups with gentle professionalism. Jack paused by the clinic entrance, watching a young mother cradle her newborn as she filled out intake forms. He remembered the day he had first stood on this lot, shoveling frost-clad soil in the pre-dawn chill. Back then it had been just a promise on paper. Now it was a promise fulfilled. He turned to Olivia. "Look at that," he said, voice hushed. "She's safe now. They're all safe." Olivia's eyes glistened. "Because you chose to help a stranger," she said softly. That one act changed everything. They moved deeper into the building, passing a row of classrooms labeled Job Skills Workshop, Community Events, and Parent Support. In one room, a circle of neighbors sat on folding chairs sharing parenting tips over toddler-friendly snacks. In another, a father-daughter duo tackled a woodworking project, making birdhouses from leftover lumber supervised by a volunteer carpenter. The sound of power drills and laughter blended seamlessly. Jack and Olivia reached the heart of the center, a wide-open atrium beneath a skylight that framed the morning sky like a canvas. Here, picnic tables held paper cups of lemonade and trays of brownies donated by the local bakery. Children ran between tables, chasing bubbles blown by a volunteer wearing a big foam hat. Music drifted from a small stage where a community choir rehearsed "Lean on Me," their voices lifting in harmony. An elderly woman approached Jack, her walker clinking against the tile. He knelt, steadying himself on one knee. "Mr. Miller," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "I used to live in the apartments that stood here. I didn't think I'd ever see this place." She looked toward the clinic doorway. "Today I brought my granddaughter here so she can see that help is real." She tapped his shoulder. "Thank you." Jack offered a gentle smile. "Thank you for being here." He rose, brushing dust from his jeans, though he was sure no one would mind a little construction grit. This center was built on honesty and grit. Olivia joined them, handing the woman a cup of lemonade. "We couldn't have done it without you," Olivia said. "This center belongs to the community." As the choir began their first song, a hush fell over the atrium. Voices rose in clear, hopeful refrains. Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain. We all have sorrow. Jack felt a swell in his chest, the music weaving through every proud memory and future dream. He glanced at Olivia, her eyes closed, head tilted slightly as she absorbed the moment. Mia burst through the atrium doors, clutching a handful of painted stones. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed, holding them up like precious gems. Each stone bore a happy face or an encouraging word. Hope, courage, kindness. She ran to Jack, pressing one into his palm. "This is for you," she whispered. He knelt and kissed her on the top of her head. "Thank you, sweetheart." He turned the stone over in his hand, simple, smooth, imbued with her intention, a token of a little girl's big hope. Olivia moved beside him, watching their exchange. "You see," she said, "every small kindness sparks something bigger." Jack's gaze drifted back to the choir, the families, the volunteers, all woven together by a shared act of building something new from the broken pieces of the past. He thought of Emma's memory of how love could be misplaced in corridors of pain, and how now love had its own place to live and breathe. He stood drawing in the warm, laughter-filled air. Around him voices rose in song, a chorus of second chances. He placed a hand on Olivia's waist, and she rested her head on his shoulder. No words were needed. They both understood that the journey from a frozen ER bench to this lively center had been guided by compassion. The song reached its final refrain, and applause echoed off the walls like gentle raindrops. Jack looked across the atrium at the plaque above the entrance, the name shining in the morning sun. Miller Family Center. A testament not to him alone, but to the power of a single act of kindness to ignite a wave of humanity. He took Olivia's hand and turned toward the crowd, ready to join in the applause, ready to celebrate not just a building, but a living, breathing promise. And as the choir members stepped down, offering warm smiles to the community they served, Jack Miller felt a quiet truth settle in his heart, that sometimes the smallest choices, giving up a spot, extending a hand, could build a foundation for hope that would stand far longer than concrete ever could.